welcome to the forum. Obviously a long way to discussion about boundaries. I love this picture because it's where we live, and it's an amazing place, and that's why we're here, that's why we care so much about it. So, we'll start with the proceedings. Firstly, I want to acknowledge the land we meet on today is the traditional land of the Kauri people, and they respect their spiritual relationship to their country. We also acknowledge the Kauri people as the traditional custodians of the Adelaide region, and their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the living Kauri people today. So next, we'll get into the welcome. We'll welcome everybody tonight. It's another good turnout. And first of all, if I could recognise, we've got a few of our elected members here tonight. So obviously we have the Mayor from Holdfast Bay. And your name is Amanda Wilson. I remember, there you go. And so welcome, we're hearing more from Amanda later. And we've also got the Mayor from Marion, Kris Hanna, who will be hearing more from him as well. Thank you for the applause. It's good, we don't often get that. We've also got from Holdfast, we've got Claire Lindop, Annette Bradshaw, and Rebecca Apley. Yep. Anybody I've missed on the Holdfast team? There's also members of staff here, including the CEO, Roberta Bria is here tonight. And we've also got from Marion Council, we've got Tim Gard and Maggie Duncan from councillors with Marion. And I believe we've got Adrian Skoll. There he is. Thank you, Ray. Welcome. Okay, so if there's anybody I've missed out, let me know. Okay, well, we have a couple of apologies from, we have several apologies. We had a lot of people who RSVP'd for this event, and we're conscientious enough to say, sorry, can't make it. And that's exciting when people take the time. There's also the David Spears and Nicole Flynn with both apologies for tonight. But they're very keen to know how we go. Now, just to let you know, because there were quite a few people who maybe couldn't make it tonight, it's a busy time of year, we are going to record. There'll be a video and audio recording of tonight's forum. And it will only be focused this way, so if you're worried about being in the crowd scenes, don't be too concerned. And if anybody really objects to being recorded or filmed, let me know afterwards, and we might be able to edit you out if you're not supposed to be here. So quickly into a bit of housekeeping. Obviously, the toilets are straight out through that door. Mobile phones off, please. The bar is open throughout the night, and that's a third time lucky for us, because this is the first time we've actually had the bar personed. We've had to do it ourselves for the last 2 years, so that's great. So without further ado, I'm going to jump into this little series of slides. I know Dennis is our timekeeper, so he's going to give me a hard time if I go too long. So, yeah, busy year, a lot of achievements. Certainly we feel like we're getting increasing support. We're getting to see a lot more people at activities, so we're really happy with all of that. We've actually formed 10 task groups this year, which are semi-independent of the committee. A list of those groups are over on the wall by the display table, so go and have a look. If you're interested in any of those task groups, sign up. See one of the people with a badge, or one that looks like they know what they're doing, and we could sign you up for a task group. But you'll see from the list over there, there's quite a lot. I guess one of the key achievements this year, I think, has been an improved access to the key decision makers in Holdfast Council and the administration. So a little round of applause for that, because that hasn't been easy. And I guess we'll have to, whilst we don't know whether this was a success, but getting to this point on the boundary forum process, I think, has been a success, and there'll be more of that later. Can't go past this event. Many of you here probably attended the repatriation ceremony in Kingston Park Reserve. It was an incredibly moving experience, and it was one where we were all very grateful and to be welcomed in to that process. And I think there was a massive amount of healing and reconciliation on that day. And I think it gives us a great sense of how we might move forward in resolving the whole of Kingston Park Reserve together, not separately. Recently we had the Cement Hill DPA forum, which again was well attended, and obviously we put in a submission, we made a presentation to council, and I know both councils are working through the results of all of those submissions that people in the community put in, and as I understand it, the outcome and the report will go to council, I think around the 28th of January. Is that correct? Or do I know something you don't know? No, actually, I heard today that the deadline has been extended. All right, so you heard it here first. So hopefully there's a bit more time for people to process all of that. I guess the other activities that we've been involved in is supporting other local groups, one of which was the Friends of Bannon Reserve, and there was an amazing process in May where we held, there was a community meeting, public meeting, which was a very successful process. We're still waiting the outcomes of that process, but it's still happening. The other one that a lot of people will have seen by now, there is a train action group and a station care group in the community looking after Merino and Merino Rocks. So Merino Rocks has been first cab or carriage off the ranks, and that group has been very active, working with Marion Council, the Department of Transport, to undertake some improvements and enhancements, including signage, planting. The community have been involved in some of the planting process. We've had an artist who's been decorating some of those little utility boxes, and there's another project yet to roll out there. So you'll be seeing more, and that group, which is headed up by Mike Rutherford from our committee, it's independent of the committee, but obviously we support where we can. So that's ongoing, and you look out for things happening in Merino as well. So it's all about activating the station, making it more attractive, get more people using the trains. I guess we've had some challenges, and some of those will definitely be a focus for next year, where we want to get some traction. We're certainly getting a good relationship now. We want to see some outcomes. So this list here I won't go through, but I guess highlight would be, I guess, the Merino Community Hall, which is, councils would agree that's been a little bit of a slow process, but it's happening. So the consultation is still happening now, so you've still got an opportunity to get involved, and next year you should see the outcome of that consultation as to what the future of the hall might be, including renovate or detonate and replace with something suitable and appropriate. So, and it's definitely something very important to the community. And I guess, attracting more members. So you'll see later on we'll be passing around the ubiquitous clipboard, which will capture any email addresses that people want to share. It's confidential, but we would like to know if you want to hear from us. Okay, now the official bits, the committee. So if this is the committee for 2020, and there's the first few are all repeats, continuing on, so I'm very grateful they've come. So can you stand up so people can see you? And is David Cruikshank here? Hooray! So David is the new member in particular. Let's give him a big applause. And so we're going to be getting together, working out our tactics for next year. But as we do with these things, there's some movements, and I'd like Ali, Beryl, and Libby to come and join me out here, please. Can you? Yeah. So I'll keep talking. So while you're doing that, so Ali, she's been on the committee for 8 years, and she's been a vice president for 3 years. She, as you can see there, she's been managing the newsletter distribution and the volunteers that do that work. She's also a very keen champion for Kingston Park, and has been on the Holdfast Bay liaison group. So yeah, I think so, yeah, come into the limelight. You know, this could be your last chance, you know, for a bit. No, no song this time. So Beryl is past president of the association and has been on the committee now for 4 years. And she's obviously been a strong advocate for the quarry and borals activities. And she's also been on the Marion Liaison Task Group. She's a member of the Joint Working Group for the Quarry, and also a keen advocate for the Friends of McConnell campaign. So, and then Libby is been involved in event management, Kingston Park and Seacliff champion, and also the Holdfast Bay Liaison Team and Task Group. These guys have made an amazing contribution to the committee and the community throughout their tenure, and we are going to miss them from the committee. However, there's always a bright side. The bright side is we're not losing them completely, because all three are going to remain on task groups. In fact, I'm so happy that Ali is going to still manage the distribution of the newsletter, because that is no mean feat, wrangling all of that. So it is a real pleasure if I could, Fleur, if you could bring, so just to say thank you for all your contribution to the committee and your ongoing contribution, which is going to, yeah. No, you're welcome, yeah. No, we really appreciate and have love your work. Yeah, you can share the chocolates. Yeah. You can sit them quickly. So the next list I'm not going to go through, but that's just an example of the supporters that are not on the committee, but they are doing some amazing work in our task groups, supporting us in various ways. And obviously we've got sponsors. We can't do a lot of this work without sponsors. We've got our local businesses who advertise in the newsletter 4 times a year. And so I won't go through those, you'll have seen them tonight. Obviously, Nicole Flint has been kind enough to print our newsletter 4 times a year in colour, which is fantastic. That might be I haven't actually asked her yet, but I'm putting her up to commit for another 12 months. How about that? So, and obviously David Spears, who is a great supporter and often prints our flyers, like the ones you get in the newsletter. And as a result of all that, membership is free. And so if you do want to join, and you're not on our email list, then get on board. But the reason we can do that for free is because we've got sponsors and helpers. And obviously all of the volunteers, the amount of time and effort they put into supporting what we do, are also sponsoring the organisation and the community. Just a bit of information at the end of year. I guess communication and media. The one that's missing there, I think, is this. We set out as part of our strategic plan to have more of these, and I think we've succeeded. I think we've had a lot more take up of these forums. Thank you. I'm nearly there. But obviously, as you can see, some of our media has grown. Financially, we are in very good shape. We're hoping to do more activities in 2020, and also maybe do some more sponsoring of events and other activities. So we did do some sponsorship around the Marina Rocks Railway Station project. I guess those are some of the events, and probably the top one's the most important, which is an ideas forum and another community survey. It's 2 years since we did one, so I think it's time to ask you what you think, whether you agree with what we're doing and whether you think there's other things we're missing. And I guess the priorities for next year, I guess, it's to continue doing what we're doing. And I guess there's a list there I won't go through, but obviously one of those is the community survey and ideas forum, and obviously more importantly, whatever the outcome from this forum, there will be an ongoing process for the association and the community to engage and get involved. So I will close at that point. How am I doing, Dennis? Am I okay? Good. So now I'm going to move on to part 2. If there are any questions, there will be a full report go up online, and I'll email that out to people. So if you've got any questions, see me later. For now, I'm going to ask Ric Bierbaum to join us. Now, Ric was on the committee. He's one of those supporters. He's also a very active supporter, particularly on this boundaries change issue. So Ric has been on quite a big journey in getting to this point, and now I'm going to hand over to Ric so he can tell you all about what we've found and what's going to happen tonight. Thank you, Ric.
Welcome everybody. Just before I start on the forum part of tonight's proceedings, I just want to say thank you to David. David has spent the last few minutes acknowledging a lot of other people, but his efforts, his contribution, his leadership, his energy has been absolutely fantastic for a very long time. He is one of the main reasons why this association and this community are held in such high regard by other community associations around the state. David, you take a lot of responsibility and credit for doing that. Fantastic. Thank you. Okay. Tonight's forum, titled Council Boundary Changes, Mergers or, is quite deliberate. What we're wanting to do is to respond to a series of communications that we've been seeing being played out in the media, primarily by the two mayors, but also by our local MP, around the possibility, the benefits, the arguments for and against council boundary changes, mergers, and also some other possibilities. The program for tonight is essentially going to take this sort of format. I'm going to provide you with just a few minutes of the background and context. Then one of the things that we did leading up to this forum was to issue a questionnaire that went out to all members of the 5049 community, both via the newsletter and also online. And we got a good positive response to that. And I'll come back to that in just a moment. Following the sharing of the key points that were raised in that or from that questionnaire, we've been very pleased that both of our mayors have been able to come and join us this evening to essentially put some meat on those bones, those broad statements that we've been seeing in the media. We think that we need far more detail and an elaboration on what it was that they saw as the respective cost benefits of their proposals. So they're both going to give us 15-minute presentations. Following that, we're going to open up the floor to people here to ask questions for about 25 minutes. Then we'll come back and ask each of the mayors to provide us with some closing comments. We'll point to some next steps in terms of where to from here, and then close, and at the same time also invite people, if they do want to have a quick chat with either of the mayors, that they can issue any questions that they have then as well. So that's essentially the format that we've got for tonight. We've got Dennis as timekeeper, and he's a tough timekeeper, so we're going to actually be sticking to these fairly closely. In terms of a broad overview of the background context, councils are always talking about how they might configure themselves different structurally and so on. And they've probably been doing this for a long time. It's one of the things that they point to as a way of possibly changing, reforming, improving the way they go about doing their business in providing services to our communities. In this particular case, the first official move, if you like, was made by the City of Holdfast Bay, where Mayor Amanda Wilson brought a proposal that was unanimously endorsed by the council for Merino and also Glengarry to be brought into the City of Holdfast Bay from the City of Marion. As I said, that was unanimously endorsed by the council, so that triggered a response and a counterclaim from the City of Marion, or from the Mayor of the City of Marion, who argued that essentially there was not to be much to be gained by making boundary changes alone, and that the real benefits in terms of providing improved services at a lower, reduced unit cost would be to merge the two councils. So the preference that has been proposed by the City of Marion is not a council boundary change, but in fact a merger. And again, Mayor Kris Hanna will be elaborating on that in just a moment. At the same time, we saw numerous exchanges going on in the media. The 5049 coastal community doesn't have a consensus view on either of these proposals. It's basically saying there isn't sufficient information to base a firm shared view across the community. And that's why we're here tonight, essentially, and that is as a starting point, not an end point. Nobody's looking for anybody to make any big decisions tonight, but rather to keep this ball rolling and hopefully have a lot more people walk away with a much better idea of what the issues, the considerations, the facts are that sit behind these proposals. As I said, one of the things that we thought we needed to do fairly early on was to ask the community what its initial response was, acknowledging, of course, that that's in the absence of any great details having been provided, but as a wet finger in the air, a broad sense of what the community believed some of the key issues were associated with these two proposals. So we sent out a questionnaire to our membership, and we got back 70 written responses, which was terrific. That constituted about 16% of our members. And those people were essentially asked to consider the benefits of the Holdfast Bay boundary change proposal, the costs of doing that. They were also asked to consider what the benefits of the merger, the City of Marion merger model would be, and what their disadvantages, what concerns they had associated with that proposal as well. They were also asked to look at alternatives in addition to those structural changes. And we captured that, as well as a number of concerns and questions, other questions that people had. And we have presented those in an anonymous form, having taken the names out of the people who actually submitted those responses and sent them off to the mayors. Because we don't believe in setting up forums like this to catch people out. We thought it was important for them to know what the initial issues, feelings, views were of the local community, in as much as we captured in those 70+ responses. So we have a sense of what people are thinking initially at this very early stage in the evolution of this process, and we issued that information to the mayors and asked them to give that due consideration in their preparation for their presentations tonight. In summary, and we're talking about, I guess, 70 responses, respondents, and I think they answered 5 or 6 questions, 350 comments, if you like, against those different questions. And we've summarised that very, very briefly. And I have to acknowledge the fact that the comments people made were qualitative. They weren't closed-ended questions. And what we have are a series of benefits that people saw, and I won't discuss or analyse these in depth now, but it's important for you to have a sense of the flavour of what people were saying. And some of the big issues were the benefits that people saw with the Holdfast Bay model was that there is the prospect of lower council rates. 24% didn't say, thought there would be no benefits. Some people thought there would be greater capacity through the Holdfast Bay model to manage coastal environment. Some people said that the Merino residents relate more to the City of Holdfast Bay than to Marion, and that Holdfast Bay would be more responsive to community needs and provide better services. Some of the concerns, a recurring theme was around the existing Holdfast Bay Council debt and capacity, its debt to revenue ratio and its capacity to meet community needs. That came up. What that's founded on, I'm not sure, but they're the responses people came back with. The inability to proceed with major projects to which City of Marion is already committed, that was a concern. The risk of future higher council rates. On the one hand, you've got one group of people saying that's a concern, other people saw that as a benefit. When it came to the City of Marion model, the most significant benefit that people saw were related to issues associated with the potential for increased economies of scale, efficiency and flexibility by merging. 19% didn't think that they'd see any benefits at all. The concerns that people saw were around the merged council being too big to be responsive. It would mean higher rates for those in Holdfast Bay. Mergers rarely reduce council rates, and there were also concerns about what impact this might have, these transitional arrangements might have on the staff. The alternatives that people raised were around, the most significant one was around retaining the status quo. So one option, people said, leave things as they are. Don't go for one model or the other, just leave things as they are. Others threw up options around why stop at 2 councils, why not look at more, why not have 2 or 3 councils for the whole metropolitan area, etc. You'll get a copy of these, post this, sent out through the email, and also be available up on the website. And that applies to all of the slides that we're showing tonight. So you'll have that to be able to refer to in greater detail. I'm going to be very quick about this, but some of the other questions that a number of people raised were around things like, and I'll only pick a couple of these because, as I said, you can look at it in much more detail when you look at it online. What is Holdfast Bay's rationale for wanting to include Merino? And Amanda will speak to those in a moment. Will Marion continue to undertake the sorts of activities and deliver the assets that it's been talking about if it sees the possibility of Holdfast Bay bringing Merino into the council? And a number of other issues. But it's worth having a look at these things after this, in addition to what the two mayors have to say as well. I'm now going to hand over to firstly Mayor Amanda Wilson, because it was the City of Holdfast Bay which essentially got this ball rolling, and she's going to share with us some of those details, arguing for the proposal that they're putting forward.
Good evening, and thank you for coming, everybody. I'd particularly like to thank the 5049 group for putting on tonight's community forum. It takes a lot of effort and energy and organisation to be able to bring this sort of thing together, so thank you very much, Ric, for doing that. I'd like to talk to you a bit tonight about the idea of a boundary change for Merino. And the first question is, well, why are we here? Well, on the 1st of January this year, the state government changed the legislation. And the legislation now provides for either a community group or a council to apply to the Boundaries Commissioner to change the boundaries. And what this means that if a head petitioner can attract 10% of the voters in the area, that they can lodge an application with the Boundaries Commissioner. And the first thing that the Boundaries Commissioner will decide will be the threshold question of whether or not it should be investigated any further. At that point, and I should add first of all that Holdfast Bay the motion was not to do a boundary reform change. It's actually to see if the community would like to lodge an application for a boundary change, and in the event that the community did want to do that, that we would be supportive of it. So I want to just make it very clear from the beginning that the ratepayers and the residents of Merino are actually in control of this whole process, that we're not initiating any application at all. So the Boundary Commission will then decide the threshold question of whether or not that this is a boundary change that should be investigated. And once that decision is made, more than likely in the affirmative, that will then trigger an investigation process. And at that stage, Holdfast Bay will then go in and have a look at the assets and the infrastructure, and then we'll make our own determination about whether or not this is in the best interest of our ratepayers as well. So we're here tonight because since the election, constantly I have people that live in Merino tell me that they feel that they're a part of Holdfast Bay. They have kids at my kids' school, or they are members of our clubs, or they use our facilities, or they've grown up here and they've been to school down in Holdfast Bay themselves. So when I became mayor and I looked into it a bit more, I thought, well, this might be the perfect opportunity to have this conversation, to see whether or not this is something that the Merino residents want, whether or not it's in our financial interest to do that, and whether or not we should develop this conversation. But as I said, it's very much the community's decision, and the purpose of tonight is just to explain to you the process. It's a very long-term process. Wouldn't be looking for any sort of change to happen until the next election, which is in 3 years' time. So there's plenty of time to get heads around everything. So this is all about communities of interest. And of course, it's the 5049 group who today convened this meeting. And obviously, they see a community of interest between everybody that lives in that area, Merino, Kingston Park, and Seacliff. And we see that as just as much as you do. We are all a part of the coastal community. We're a part of the bay. I mean, you are the end of the bay, and it's a natural geographical boundary to be down here. Interestingly, Merino was once part of the Brighton District Council before it became before it became Marion. And we know that the residents work and play in Holdfast Bay, members of our surf club, tennis clubs. So what are the benefits for the Merino residents? Well, as I said, you already use our facilities, and we know that. You're big users of our library. And here we are at this amazing facility here that was only opened last year. But overwhelmingly, the biggest benefit for you is the reduction in rates. You can see from the chart here and on the brochure that I've provided you, is that on an average house of $650,000, there would be a reduction in rates per annum of over $600. If your property is around $900,000, you'd be looking at an annual saving of $838. Now, if you're lucky enough to have a $1.2 million place around here, which I'm sure in very near future there'll be a lot of places because it's such a beautiful area, you'll be having a reduction in your fees of $1,118. And I think that's significant. That's because the rate in the dollar in Holdfast Bay is a lot lower. So there's many benefits for the Merino. There's the economic benefit. There's the benefit of being a part of the community and contributing your rates to a part of the community that you're using. We see that there's been a lack of investment in Merino. There's been a lot of complaints to me about the lack of amenity and that retaining walls are falling over and that the roads aren't up to the standard. In comparison, in the last 5 years, Holdfast Bay has invested $29 million in the Brighton and Seacliff wards, which is a substantial fund. That does include grant funding. I'd just like to draw attention to the fact that many people think that we spend a lot of our money in the Glenelg and Somerton area, but the contrast is that we have only invested $9 million, including grant funding, into the Glenelg and Somerton area in the last 5 years. There's been conjecture that the reason we're doing this is to pay off some of our debt, but on a very basic analysis, it appears that our net asset position would only be improved by between $296,000 and $500,000 per annum. So we have a consolidated revenue at Holdfast Bay of $77 million. So it is not a big amount compared to what our full consolidated revenue is. Our long-term debt, we're committed to keeping our rates down to capped to the local government CPI level. We have borrowed substantially to invest in our community. This is a prime example of our investment. This is about a $12 million community venue that we have just completed last year. We've also invested heavily in the Brighton Sporting Precinct, which is being constructed at the moment. That's a $12.7 million facility. And we think that because interest rates are low right now, and we have the capacity to borrow and to repay, debt ceiling is the ceiling is at 2% and we're at 1%. We don't have a problem with our debt position. Actually, I might bring that. And once again, as I said, if the community is so inclined to lodge an application with the Boundaries Commissioner, Holdfast Bay would want to do their own asset infrastructure assessment to see what sort of liabilities and on-costs we might take on. And if it comes back that it's detrimental to our ratepayers, then we certainly wouldn't be considering it. Merger's also been flouted, and I can unequivocally say that Holdfast Bay is not interested in a merger. We don't think that mega councils have been successful anywhere, and you just need to have a look at Onkaparinga to see that, you know, once they start to become big, they become unresponsive, and it's just something that the Holdfast Bay community wouldn't do because they like having a boutique council, but they also like that their council rates are substantially lower. Also, I don't believe that there's a current motion from the Marion Council to merge. So it's, as far as we're concerned, it's an impossibility. It's not going to happen. It doesn't have any sort of political support whatsoever. So where to next? So this is really the first basic step to see whether or not there is some community interest in this. In the long term, a lot of analysis will be required. And I also wanted to point out that in the event there was a change in the boundaries, that you would have more representation. At the moment you have great representation, you have 2 elected members, but if we changed our boundaries you would have 3 elected members, and it would be the Seacliff, Merino and Kingston Park area, so it would be a smaller area as well. And I think that, you know, if you feel it's in your best interest to stay in Marion, then by all means do it. I mean, this is where you live. It's your decision. We're happy either way. It just seems to us that the opportunity has presented itself this year. I know that Minister Spears is very keen for this to happen. He was a great supporter of this legislation. And so it just seemed that, well, this is the opportunity. And if not now, it's probably not going to happen again. So I'll leave it there. I won't even chew through my 15 minutes.
good evening, everyone, and thank you to the Association for organising and for the recognition of the fact we're on the traditional lands of the Gun people. Thanks, Mayor Wilson, for your talk, and I also appreciate the councillors from both Holdfast Bay and Marion that are present, and the staff as well. Well, let's start with an overview from the way I can say I see it. But the fact is, just to pick up on one of Amanda's last points, it's correct, there is no motion of Marion Council that has been resolved in relation to any of this at this point, but of course there have been informal discussions. So no decision, that's true, but if there was a motion put on the table by someone else that the boundaries will change, Marion would be ready to respond very quickly. So just a summary here. We've been, over the last 5 years, reducing our rate rises dramatically from practically 5% every year down to the inflation rate. We're talking about something less than inflation rate next year. Lower debt. So even though obviously Marion is a larger council, you'll see from some figures in a moment, Holdfast Bay in terms of residents and ratepayers, about 40% of the size of Marion. But in terms of debt, we've got about $7 million of debt. We're paying off about $1 million a year. I believe Holdfast Bay debt, plus or minus, is about double that amount of debt. Both councils are planning, I see in the long-term financial plans, both councils are planning to increase debt for specific and good community projects over the next couple of years. But the fact that we're paying off debt at $1 million a year gives me some comfort. And I think that, well, generally we're getting a good response from Merino residents, but of course we're also getting lots of requests for improvements, and we're dealing with those as best we can. Some really big issues at the moment in Merino in terms of infrastructure that council and probably state government needs to address. The coastal walkway's been in the news. Merino Community Hall has been discussed for a few years now, and I lament how slowly it takes councils to do things, but we are getting there. And some other big things happening with the Seacliff Park development that's been mentioned. Marion Golf Course just up the road needs some attention. We're planning a streetscape, which is a beautification entrance to Schofield Road, Newland Avenue, and I'll talk about mergers a bit later on. So, obviously you know the area. Well, just for those who are interested in the comparison, as I said, Holdfast Bay about 40% the size of Marion. It's interesting then to compare with the assets and budgets. So you see that in terms of assets, you'll see that Marion is a bit more than double. In terms of the operating budget, Marion's double, or put it that way, Holdfast Bay budget about 50% less. Capital Works about 50% of Marion's budget. Again, staff, it's pretty close to 50% or a bit under 50% of Marion's staff. Street trees, of course, when people pick out statistics for these things, you are selectives, but that's one we're particularly proud of, where we've rapidly increased the number of annual street trees planted, and that figure is only going to increase rather than settle down again. So one thing I need to be upfront about, I'm very well aware, as you all would be, that there are streets in Merino where on one side of the road you'll pay less rates to Holdfast Bay than you would if that house tomorrow was moved to Marion. But it's not as simple as that. One thing I wanted to highlight with this graph, you'll see, so the numbers are a bit small at the bottom, but they're basically the last 5 financial years leading up to this one, where the average rate increases are mapped. So you can see that we're catching up. I suppose that's not the same as having cheaper rates, but it does show that we're catching up through efficiency. Costs will increase based on one assumption, which I know is debatable. This goes back to the council boundary change process. And Amanda mentioned the rules changed at the beginning of the year. Marion Council looked into it as well. And one thing that, I'll say two things actually about the, I'll go back. Yes. Two things about the process. One is that a curious feature of it is that if a council initiates boundary change, the Boundaries Commission goes and hires consultants. You sort of lose control of the process. They get the consultants, and then they send you the bill for the consultants. So no wonder Holdfast Bay Council, and I must admit, gave Marion Council cold feet about any initiative as well. You get the bill for the consultants, even though you don't choose them, and you don't even know exactly what brief they're going to get. The Boundaries Commission sorts that and sends you the bill. On the other hand, if a residents group puts it forward, the system doesn't seem to cater for an invoice that comes to the residents group. So doesn't it make sense for a council to suggest to the residents that they push it forward? So maybe that's why we're here. The other feature about the process that I wanted to point out is that there's a suggestion in the legislation that no one should be worse off. That's probably one of those dreams that can't really happen. But what has happened when we went through a number of council amalgamations, including Brighton Glenelg, many of you would remember, in the 90s, is that the acquiring council has to pay compensation, or whatever you want to call it, for the assets that are being moved. Why? Take the example of Merino, because if over many years residents of the whole of the City of Marion have had their rates taken from them to pay for things in Merino, and then those ratepayers are in another council area, it makes sense that there's a reimbursement for those rates which have been put forward by the Marion people. And that is manifested in a bill to the acquiring council for the assets that are acquired. I hope that makes sense. So in Merino, we've got about $25 million worth of council assets. So if there was simply a transfer of Merino, Marion Council, and it would be duty bound to do this according to the interests of the City of Marion residents, would go to the Boundaries Commission and say, we want that $25 million to pay for those assets which all of the City of Marion residents have essentially purchased over the years. So if that happened, there would actually be increased costs because there'd be a very substantial interest bill attached to borrowing $25 million. And that's why I've mentioned in the slide there, increased debt for Holdfast. It's been mentioned that quite a few things happening in Merino at the moment, and it would be unfortunate, I think, if some of these really important projects and projects valued by the community were to come to a halt. Now, if you put yourself in the situation of selling your house and you know that some renovations need to be done, do you renovate the house not knowing if that's going to be paid for with the purchase price or not? Or is it better just to hold off until you know what's happening with the end of the process? So one of the people that emailed me during when this was in the media and so on, said, oh, are you making a threat? You won't do this stuff. It's not about that at all, but just being prudent. Say, for example, we're talking about investing millions to do something special on the side of the Merino Hall. Why would, in the next year, I mean, if there wasn't an initiative put on the table to remove Merino, it just wouldn't make sense for Marion residents to spend money on something that's no longer going to be part of the City of Marion. I hope people can understand that. It just wouldn't be prudent to do it on behalf of all of the residents of the council that might be losing that asset. And the same thing goes for the other things I've mentioned. The golf course is fantastic, but it needs work in terms of the clubhouse, car park, and also the irrigation system. And we're looking at that at the moment. I've got Seacliff Park development. Of course, that's essentially a private development, but there's going to be a significant part of community space, public space, as part of that development. And I suppose it's just posing the question, who do you want to be responsible for developing that space the way you want it? Which council is going to be more responsive, which council is going to be able to afford to put in the facilities that you want. The other thing I'll mention is that Marion Council has been recognised as a leader among local government councils. The Productivity Commission has just issued a report with some praise for Marion Council, and particularly the way that we've collaborated with other councils to save our ratepayers money. In particular, we've been working quite a bit with City of Charles Sturt and the City of Port Adelaide. If that's for me, David, tell them I'm in a meeting. But we have literally saved hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in expenses through these collaborations. We've offered to work with Holdfast Bay on such things, but we're finding more willing partners at the other end of town. It's saving us money, so it's really it's the future for councils in Adelaide, really. This is an interesting one because we can talk about rates, and I know that I can't win that battle. If somebody doesn't care about anything else, any council services, and they just want a lower rates bill next year, then they'll probably support, oh, let's get our house into another council area. But let's look at, instead of the revenue side, from the council point of view, look at the cost side. So that graph on your left is about the operating count, the operating costs per resident. So at the moment, there's a gap. I'm afraid I don't have a pointer, but the Marion is the darker blue line on the bottom, and Holdfast Bay the higher line. If you look at the projection over the 10 years, it's probably fairer to start where we are now, which is, might do that. Oh, look at that. It's going to do some, not very well. Yeah. So you've got Holdfast Bay just under $1,800. You've got Marion a bit less than $1,600, about $210 difference per ratepayer. But the trend is for Marion's to decrease, or rather increase less fast than Holdfast Bay. So at the end of the 10-year period, 2027, 28, and this is drawn from the financial documents of both councils, you've got a $400 per ratepayer gap. So I'll show you what that sort of means in practical terms in the next couple of slides. But the other one that I picked out is asset renewal rates. So this is essentially how much money is put into building beautiful facilities like this. And the fact that the blue line, Marion, is above that brown line just means that we are doing more of that renewal of public facilities than Holdfast Bay. Not in absolute terms, but in terms of percentages of our budget, as well as absolute terms. Now, if at the moment I mentioned borrowings, and this is about the percentage of borrowings compared to the assets you've got. With Holdfast Bay's borrowings being higher, you can see that solid orange line above 2%, forecast to head up past 3%, and you can see Marion's line, the solid blue line, 1%, starting to head up to 1.5%, but then trailing back again, because both councils, in fact all councils in South Australia, have to map out the next 10 years financially as best they can. So that's where these figures are taken from. If Marion succeeded through a Boundaries Commission process that the full value of those merino assets is payable by Holdfast Bay to Marion, then the debt, the borrowing to asset ratio becomes the dotted orange line for Holdfast Bay and the dotted blue line for Marion. And you see that's actually at -1%, which means we've got more money than we know what to do with, and we have to start getting money back to ratepayers, basically. So, thoughts on mergers. So, I'm really glad that Amanda or Mel Wilson, showed us that slide on community of interest. Because as I understand Holdfast Bay Council's position, it's primarily based on community of interest. Well, I think most of us would recognise that across Holdfast Bay and Marion, we all use each other's facilities all the time. Whether you're in Warradale or Shido Park or Hallett Cove, you go down to Glenelg at the great activities they have by the jetty sometimes, and you go to the beaches, you go for a stroll along the Esplanade in what is the Holdfast Bay Council. But by the same token, if you're living in Holdfast Bay, you might go to the Marion Outdoor Pool. You probably go and shop at Westfield sometimes. You might come to the symphony we had at Warraparinga in the Wetlands with the Adelaide Symphony Orchestra recently. So the fact is, it's a permeable boundary, isn't it? The only difference you can tell with a lot of the streets that run up Brighton Road is that there's a very slight shading difference in the asphalt. It goes from dark grey to light grey in certain streets, and that's how you know the council boundary, because they've been laid at different times. I've finished my 15 minutes, so these slides will be available to you later. If I could make just one more important point, and that is that with the lower operating costs, if you applied Marion's operating costs per resident to the whole of the area, you actually end up with a 1,658 rate figure, average rate per ratepayer, rather than what we're paying now. And it ends up being cheaper for everybody. Incredible, but true. And there's a more detailed graph that shows why there are savings if, in fact, we were able to operate the Marion way throughout this whole area. And we wouldn't be too big. We'd go from being Marion at the moment 6th biggest to a combined council would be 3rd biggest in Adelaide, but we certainly wouldn't want to get as big as on Warraparinga. And that will do for me. Thank you very much.
Okay, now it's your chance to direct any questions to Mayor Wilson or Hanna. In doing so, I'd ask that you state your name, your suburb, and that you keep your question quite specific to tonight's topic. So if you could do that, please. We've got 25 minutes before Dennis gongs us again. So, any questions? And could you also nominate who you're directing your question to, please? Okay. Yes.
I'm Dr. Eva Florence Carter.
Could you wait for the mic?
I'm all for joining Holdfast Bay, but also I'd like to ask Kris Hanna, where have you got the figures for the satisfaction? Oh, that's better. Where you get the figures for satisfaction you listed Marion, Holdfast Bay? Where would you get those?
Yes, Evelyn, it's a very good question. We didn't do push polling, as I've seen in some cases, like would you like lower rates and world peace? You get an amazing 98% yes. I don't know what happens to the other 2%. But it's done as a completely neutral survey sent out at random to about, thousands of homes, and we usually get back about 10%. And we do it that way rather than relying on the internet or something because it's a random sample. So that's how we've done it. I agree with you. I think that such surveys need to be treated with some caution, but at least I would say we're not doing too badly, notwithstanding that you and I might have differences about bandwidth for discussing.
Good evening, and good evening to everybody. I'm Fran Southern, the chairperson of the Merino Community Hall, and clearly that's one of the interesting things that's been up on the screen. Our hall has 14 groups that come through the hall every single week, and that's over 400 people. Now the whole thing is administered by volunteers. Unfortunately, the small hall and the kitchen are falling to bits, and we have started a process with Marion Council and particularly community consultation to see whether people would like a new hall or a redeveloped old hall or nothing. Council has also bought the block of land immediately behind the hall, which is going to give us a lot more flexibility. Now, my question to both mayors, if I may, is what's going to happen to the processes that are going on right now? We seem to be on a trajectory to do community consultation. Something is going to happen, we thought, but now I'm really wondering if it's all going to stop and we're all going to fall down. It's quite possible. It's not looking good at the back of that hall. But I'd also like to say that our local councillors have been fantastic with supporters, and so has the Residents Association. Thank you.
From Marion's point of view, but look, this whole issue has been stirred up during the year, but Marion Council's basically just proceeding with business as usual. So after the various delays which Fran's well aware of, we are getting on with a consultation. We look like we are prepared to spend some money there to do something special. We don't know what that will be yet. But it's not for me as an individual, albeit mayor or otherwise, to say, oh, if there's a proposal, everything stops. But for the reasons I mentioned, you would think we would have to at least pause to await the outcome of that process.
Thanks. I would have thought that you've been paying rates for such a long time as a resident that the work should just keep going. Our view is that the assets in Merino are effectively held by the council on trust for you, and that the ratepayers and the residents own the assets, so I wouldn't see why it would stop. These sorts of issues, though, are something that we haven't looked at yet because we're at the very beginning of the process. We wanted to see, first of all, if there's any appetite at all in discussing the boundary change further. But in saying that, it has been suggested that because there would be such a saving to the ratepayers of Merino for paying less rates, that we could not reduce them all the way down to what they should be initially and ring back that money or quarantine it. So you've got a special fund of money that can pay for certain things that you want to have done. So when a coast path being redone or the whole. But these are the sorts of conversations that we could have if the conversation was advanced.
Yeah, I've got two questions. My name's John. I'm a Merino resident. The first one's for Kris, and that would be why would you like to Merino to remain as part of Marion? You didn't sort of state that in any way in your talk there, I thought. And the other one was to Holdfast Bay Mayor, Amanda. Yes, hello Amanda. And the question would be, would Merino then become part of the Brighton High School zone? That would be great.
Thank you. Well, I've tried to make that presentation from the perspective of a thinking Merino resident and bring the science to it, not just the feelings to it. So I said there was no official position of Marion, but at the same time, there is nothing but positive inclusion of Merino in all of our deliberations at Marion Council. So it's not like we're fighting on an emotional basis. We weep if we lose Merino. It's just trying to look at the maths and work out what's best for the residents. But like Amanda, completely recognise it's the choice of the people.
I don't think you would come into the catchment area. However, Holdfast Bay does contribute financially towards Brighton High School. We helped fund their new hall, which was built a few years ago. So you'd have the argument that you're contributing to, you're a part of our community, and you should be able to come into the catchments, but I think that's a state government issue. You have to work on David's views for that one.
Thank you very much for taking my question. I'm Bob Kirch. I've lived in Merino for 15 years. I'm opposed to moving away from Marion. It has been suggested that our rates will be lower if we are part of Holdfast Bay. I don't know that this is true, but under the very good leadership of Mayor Hanna, there seems to have been a concentrated attempt to hold down rates. In fact, in the last 5 years, my rates have only increased 1.12%. That's for 5 years. That's 0.2% a year. Can Holdfast Bay match that? Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Bob. And as I said before, if you don't want to join Holdfast Bay, that's absolutely up to you, and it's the decision of the residents in total. But insofar as matching the rates, if you've got a rate increase of 1.1%, but you're already starting at a high rate of, say, $1,000, you're still paying more. If you have 1.1% on a lesser amount, it doesn't correspond like that. I don't think that's, the figures are factual. They're taken from our rates in the dollar. As I had it up on the screen, for say your house is $900,000, you'd be saving $838 a year, every year.
Yeah.
This is to Amanda, and there's one to Kris also. Amanda, you said you were not initiating the change. However, by putting the question and using a dollar-focused carrot, is it not tantamount to a tempting proposition? A relatively decent proposition, but a proposition nonetheless. How sustainable are the figures that you give us, really? It's unknown and would be forgotten in a year or two if things changed dramatically. It reminds me a little bit of a telco phone call telling us to change because I'm going to save so much money this year, but there's swings and roundabouts. The other question I have is to Kris, is the merger just an answer to this proposition that everyone knows probably won't happen and will stay as we are? And if there was a merger, who would be there?
I suppose the Boundaries Commission will be looking at whether or not there's community interest, and that is the main issue. But you can't get aside from the fact, the surveys that were provided to us from the 5049 said that the reduction of rates was the most important thing that was, and it's been raised as well here tonight. So I wanted to make sure that I crunched the numbers and I had the information for you, because I assumed that it would be asked, because it's important. Insofar as a long-term financial viability, I've actually brought along our annual plan, and all of our figures are in there. Our current debt is $12.4 million. We paid off $1 million in the last year of debt as well. Our long-term financial plans, as Mayor Hanna put up on the board, are there for everyone to see for the next 10 years, and being signed off by our auditors. I don't think there's much more I can say.
Thank you. Look, over many years there has been talk, whispers, rumours about amalgamation and so on. I can remember right from in this area right back in the 90s, and it never went anywhere. But I suppose from Marion Council's point of view, and I can only base this on our informal discussions, that if the door is open, if you like, if the game starts, that we're now talking about boundaries based on community of interest. Certainly from the informal feedback I've had at Marion Council, it's overwhelmingly, well, if there's community of interest we're discussing and pursuing, then amalgamation makes more sense. So it isn't something that we've been pushing for, but if the whole box is opened, then it seems a much better result than just carving off a suburb. So that answers that question. Look, I do refuse to be drawn into any sort of personal tete-a-tete in relation to this, but it does, the question, thank you, does give me an opportunity to rebut a couple of things. I don't know if Mayor Wilson said this, but this is how she was quoted in the paper, that she didn't want empire building of mayors pushing for amalgamation. I'm not out to build an empire, I can tell you that. The job of mayor would be the same, whether it's Mayor of Marion or Mayor of the Southwestern New Council, whatever, and it really just shouldn't be personal. I mean, you work out what's best for the community, and then there'll be a new council structure, take a little while to evolve, and then good luck to whoever runs it after that.
Can you all hear me okay? My name is Calvin Smith and I'm a resident of Merino. Okay, I've been there for 10 years. My question to both mayors is, will you rule out the option of either council driving this change? Now, I think you both have, and you're both nodding. Are you nodding, Kris? Because what was, just a minute, what was said before was that there's three options. One is driven by the residents of Merino, you people, like myself, or a council can drive the change and make an application to the Electoral Commission. So what I want to know from both mayors is categorically whether they'll rule out the fact that the council will drive this change, and this change, if it happens, will be driven by us, okay? That's the first part of my question. The second part of my question is that I look at the crumbling infrastructure in my suburb, and neither mayor stands up and gives you a service level guarantee as part of the bill that you pay. I pay $3,000 a year rates, and it's the biggest bill I pay. It is much bigger than Telstra, SA Water, ETSA, gas, ESL, or house insurance. All those others I mentioned. Okay, I have a guaranteed service levy, or I have a regulated body by the government that will provide that service to me. The only one that gives you no guarantee of service of any kind, you have no say of where your money goes, is council.
Yeah.
So, yep, now I'm starting to get a few people interested in these comments.
Okay, we'll just keep it
I'm going to keep it short.
I think the question brief.
Okay, the question is two parts. You've heard both of the parts. What's the count? Will they rule out the question? Will they rule out the application driven by the council? And second, will either mayor stand up and give you a service level guarantee?
Thanks, Calvin. I can categorically rule out any council-led application for a boundary change. Not only is it more cost prohibitive for us to do, but that would be like invading somewhere to force our will upon another place. It's just not what the whole thing is about. This is all about the residents making their own decisions. Insofar as the standard of infrastructure and the maintenance, it's certainly a concern of ours that Merino may not be to the same standards of Holdfast Bay, and that would be a very big investigation that we would have to do. Now, if a merger went, sorry, I'm confused now, if a boundary change went through, and if we decided that we were going to take on these jobs, then we might have to think about, well, how are we going to finance that? Are we going to quarantine that rate? No, but I'm talking about bringing up the amenity of your area. You're talking about crumbling streets and that you pay for services. It's exactly what I'm talking about.
Have a look at the roundabout out here where those cars are going around now. I've been complaining about the safety issue there for 10 years to Holdfast Bay Council. It's a safety issue. Nothing's been done. Tim, you've been writing letters to the council for years, haven't you? I want to hear a guarantee from you people.
Well, I'm not going to provide a guarantee because I don't know what the infrastructure standard of Merino is.
No guarantee.
And it's not until we have a full investigation in that we can see what it's like. I'm not going to guarantee funds of our ratepayers to an area that we don't know about.
Thank you. Actually, I thought you spoke well, Kelvin. People like you should be running for council, I think. But two things. One, in relation to, the council-initiated ventures, much as we're trying to bring a business-like efficiency to Marion Council, mayors aren't like chief executives. They can't make promises on behalf of council, so I just can't do that. It's up to councils to make resolutions, and then mayors are bound by those resolutions. Holdfast Bay has a resolution on the books about this. Marion doesn't. In relation to service levels, no, there's not really a guarantee other than continual engagement with your local representatives, your local councillors. Now, that doesn't always work. Sometimes that's very frustrating, but very often it can be successful as well. So that's the best. The best guarantee of service levels is to make sure you vote in the right people.
We voted in the wrong one. Yes, it is.
Good evening, my name is Kris Hanna, I'm a resident of Seaford. Since I've retired, I've enjoyed walking the dog and having coffee down at Kingston Park kiosk. And I can't understand why part of Kingston Park is well kept and part of Kingston Park is like a dog's breakfast. And like where we have coffee, it's like a dog's breakfast. And, one thing that the Marion Council has done, they've realised that meeting places are important for people, and especially people like since I've retired, I've talked to Evan, I've talked to Graham, and it's great, having a coffee. But, the Marion Council have acknowledged these meeting places, and they've talked to people in these cafes, put in, seats, candy boxes, decking, and, there's one place I know is on Diagonal Road, the shopping centre there, and I've heard there's 3 other places, I'm not too sure where else. And I've been a resident of this council since 1980, and we have got some lovely facilities, and like that Aboriginal garden, that was built in 30 years ago, but it's not kept. It's not well kept, and I can't understand why. A lot of work went into making that garden into a lovely place, but it's not. And why is that part of the park not well kept and watered, and yet the other part of Kingston Park is? And you say that you spend money in this area, which I acknowledge you do, But I think what Marion Council has done, in acknowledging meeting places and supporting the owners of these cafes, I think it's a great idea.
Terrific, thank you.
Thank you.
I agree with you that it's really important to have places for people to meet. Kingston Park is a very difficult place, and it's the bugbear because it is an Aboriginal native title site. It was not a native title, it's a sacred site basically under the Act. It's not the technical legal term for it, but it is a place that is protected, and that we can't just go in there and build a coffee shop without having the Kauri people consent to it. And we've been working with them for years. It is a very long process, and I'm disappointed as well that the garden has not been restored. I understand that there's money in the budget that's going to happen. Sorry? There's $500,000 for Kingston Park in the budget, and that garden is going to be one of the ones that improved. But yes.
Okay, last question.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Cranley. I live in Kingston Park. As far as the taking over of Merino, that's for Merino residents to decide. My question as a Holdfast Bay councillor, resident, ratepayer, that's the one. I have come from Onkaparinga. I was in Noarlunga. It's hideously huge. I do work in the Marion Council area, and I did briefly reside there. I really, really want to stay Holdfast Bay. I do not want to merge under any circumstances. However, one of the questions, or one of the things that was brought up was the assets that are in the Merino area, that if that area is acquired, then there would have to be some kind of compensation. Now, I believe the number that Kris Hanna mentioned was $25 million because the ratepayers have spent that money. I do believe that the Merino residents were a percentage of the ratepayers, so they would have to come with some of that with them. Who determines what compensation is payable? That's my question.
Yeah, simple factual question. The Local Government Boundaries Commission. So they are commissioners appointed by the state government.
That's right. But on top of that, our argument would be that all of the assets in Merino or wherever in Holdfast Bay are owned by council as a trustee for the ratepayers. You know, we can't go and sell them to anyone. We've just made a promise that we'll hold these assets and maintain them. You've actually paid for them. So we're very strongly of the opinion that if we moved into, if Merino came into us, well, we would say, well, we are now just holding those assets and guaranteeing that we will maintain them. But we don't believe that, apart from anything that's been recently done like banned and reserved, that we should be required to pay any sort of compensation. Because if you're looking at having an act that actually works, you can't be charging $30 million in compensation. You know, it means this legislation that only came in this year would be totally unworkable. So obviously, if the Boundaries Commission come back and they have said to me privately and also the Minister's office that no, that big large swathes of compensation is not something that's been considered under the Act, although Mayor Hanna is right, the Boundaries Commission would determine the sum. And if it was a sum that we thought was completely unrealistic, well, that would be the end of the story. As I've said before, if it's not in our ratepayers' best interests, then we're not particularly interested.
Thank you to the mayors, and thank you for all those questions. Obviously, canvassing a wide range of different issues. What we're going to do now is to ask the two mayors to do a 3-minute closing statement, just to give us a summary of what they consider to be the key issues that they see ahead for them. We started off with Amanda before, so we might start with Kris this time. Thanks, Kris.
Well, I think it'll be very brief because I think the issues have been pretty well covered. So just to reiterate, there has been no Marion Council decision. We are being reactive in this process, but our informal discussions suggest that the move of one suburb to another council wouldn't be the optimum outcome, and that if the Boundaries Commission gets to look at boundaries as between Marion and Holdfast Bay, there will be earnest and prompt discussions at Marion Council about responding appropriately, and merger would certainly be on the table as an option in those circumstances. We talk about merger as a shorthand. It's really creation of a new council across both boundaries. Ends up the same thing.
Take it.
I'd just like to reiterate my earlier points that this is your decision for Merino. But, you know, I think that you're a beautiful suburb. I think that you are so lucky you have the view down the Holdfast Bay as well. But I'd also like to say that 8.8 out of 10 people in Holdfast Bay love where they live. We do a survey every year of about 3,000 people. And so, you know, we love where we live. and we don't want to change our council from being a boutique one. But this opportunity comes around rarely. We think that we're like-minded suburbs, and we're happy for you to come and join our coastal family if you want to. And just one other point, just on our operating costs, that they might be a little bit higher. That's because we maintain 9 kilometres of beach, but not just, we have the premier tourist beaches in South Australia, and that means we also have a lot of more rubbish to collect from tourists. We put on a lot more events. Just for New Year's Eve, we put on $285,000 worth of entertainment and fireworks. So, our costs of running a tourism destination are also quite high. So, I think that Holdfast Bay is the best place to live. We've got some improvements that need to be happening, especially down at Kingston Park, but that can only happen with our government friends working together. Just ask for your patience there. Okay.
Thank you again. As we said at the outset, this is a beginning, not an end. No big decisions to be made tonight, but I think that both mayors have been very open about what they consider to be the virtues of their respective models, and have shared that information with us. As I said before, the information they presented will also be up on the website over the next few days. I would now like to ask you to join me in thanking the two mayors for their presentation.